Hello. Hi, Sandra. Nice to see you. So
Hi,
happy you're here
April.
today. So, if you haven't joined us before, my name's April Sobral. I'm the founder of Retail U and the author of a book called The Positive Effect. And every week, we come live to our LinkedIn community and audience and have amazing conversations with an awesome retail leadership network that I have. And I'm so excited today because I get to bring Sandra Campos onto our show and pick her brain and have an amazing conversation about leadership, retail, and everything, and kind of learn from you. Our audience is really a retail audience that wants to grow and add value to the retail community. We were just talking about that a little bit before we got on. But really, today is to learn from you and to share this with our whole audience so that we can, get some real, leadership lessons and some thoughts and just get your perspective on things. I really believe, and I'm sure you do too, Sandra, that the effect of positive leadership is massive on a business, and particularly in retail. And we were talking about that. We're going to get into that a little bit later with what you're doing now. But yeah, we're just going to jump in. We've got about 30 minutes. And I'm just going to ask you some questions. So hopefully it'll be a great conversation today.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So excited to meet you and to be on this. And thanks for anybody who's listening during the middle of their day.
Yeah. So if you're jumping, I'm just going to say, if you jump on, just put in the chat, where you're coming from, say hi. People join from all over the globe. LinkedIn's such a great community of retail leaders globally. So yeah, say hi, jump in, say where you're coming from. And then, me and Sandra can go back and read the comments afterwards and kind of answer any questions that you have. But so Sandra, tell us your story. I've been following you on LinkedIn. I've been, doing a bit of LinkedIn stalking a little bit and your Instagram. I was like, oh, I love your Instagram. I was reading all about the horses and everything, but I'm interested today in your retail career. So tell us how you got into retail.
Wow. Well, first of all, I don't know how different my story is from a lot of people who, kind of grew up admiring others and thinking that fashion was going to be very glamorous, right? So that's really what drew me to it initially. But when I was growing up, I had a mom who helped to encourage that. And she took me to fabric stores and I would pick things out, and I was recovering our sofas or making curtains and other things. So I thought I wanted to be a designer. And so after school, when I decided I was going to move to either New York or LA for work, I had an internship, and it was a pattern making internship. And I said, nope, I'm not going to be a designer.
Wow.
Yeah, I can't do that. But I had enough kind of that I had taken in terms of courses and other things. My major was more marketing oriented, but also in terms of merchandising and product, et cetera, that I knew I wanted to get into the business. So I moved to New York right out of college and started out on the buying and retail side and working on the retail sales floor. Of course,
Okay.
long ago, there were a lot more retailers back then than there are today. Yeah. But my experience kind of took me from being able to work on the floor to when I looked at it at the time, I said, I want to be a CEO president one day. And so I looked at all the CEOs and presidents, and their trajectory was really coming out of wholesale sales. So I moved and pivoted my career at that point into the wholesale side. Wow. And had various experiences between sales and, then overseeing or merchandise planning, working with retail planning group, et cetera. I was very fortunate in terms of being able to be a part of great companies and organizations, Ralph Lauren, Donna Karan, which was obviously.
Yeah, that was iconic back then. Yeah.
And during the time that I was in those companies, we were launching or relaunching businesses. So when you're launching a business, as many people know, you're doing everything, right?
Yeah.
So you learn so much. You have your hands in more than just your siloed area of responsibility. And that's where you learn the most. That's for me anyway. That's where I learned the most. So I was able to kind of take that and continue to just rise through the ranks in terms of sales leadership, and then having responsibility for more than just sales, and then eventually became obviously president of brand and then CEO. So I've been doing that for now, like the last 15 years. I've been president or CEO of brands. And within that time period, I also had a 6-year stint where I was an entrepreneur. So passion is really building businesses and finding white space within an industry, within our industry, and within a specific category that I think is either something that's a great potential or will explode. And at the time, we were creating something that really wasn't out there that much. It was celebrity brands, especially in the teen market. So we had gone to Selena Gomez when she was 15 years old, and we created a brand. Tony Melillo, he was my business partner.
Wow.
We worked together for 6 years to create a business that was exclusive at the time for her. And it was really about mass market. It was getting it very broadly defined in 14 different categories of business. We had everything from sleepwear to footwear to, obviously apparel was the base. And there was a lot of fun. It was a lot of learning. But during that time, that was 2009. So if you remember that time period, e-commerce was just starting. There was a lot of innovation happening as well. So my shift in terms of youth culture marketing and focusing on branding and brand development and the licensing components and all that really kind of took on its own life as well. So that was a lot of fun. And then going back into corporate and leading other brands. And I then pivoted again after pandemic hit last year and things changed. And DVF, where I was the CEO, I had changed as well. So I was there last June and then started as the CEO of a retail tech company called Project Ver. But I'm like kind of giving you a long answer. How did I get here? One is I had the passion for fashion, which was going to be very glamorous, but I then started seeing the reality and knew I was become a CEO. So my trajectory was really to kind of go through sales, go through the different experience levels, pivoting my career where I needed to, because ultimately what I wanted to constantly do was learn. And that's still what I want to do. I want to just continue to learn. And that's a really important part of what I do and how I focus even my own leadership with teams. I think that, business is heading and our responsibility to be able to lead others and help the next generation of leaders.
There's so much in what you just shared. Like, I think back, I think like how you said you wanted to be a CEO, that's so inspiring, especially for women leaders to hear, I think, that you actually did that. And like to think about having that thought, oh, I want to be a CEO and this is how I do it. And then looked at like going from wholesale to going to that path. Like, that's a really interesting insight. Thinking about like what that future, that role that you want, and then what do you need to do to get there to learn to actually achieve the goal that you've set. I think that's a huge learning for many people, because I think a lot of people in retail are just kind of winging it or kind of flying. You do the job, you're doing really well, you get promoted, you keep getting a little bit more, but like strategically thinking about where you want to go, I think that's huge. And I think it's interesting you said about like the whole buying and merchandising piece, because I didn't have that experience in my career. I came directly through operations, and I always felt that piece was missing for me a little bit to take on more than just being a VP of stores. So I think there's a lot to be said for that as well, like doing different roles, right? That's what you shared, kind of doing different things and pivoting so that you can build this kind of organic skill set that's going to help you lead a whole company or organization.
Yeah. And at the time that I started in the industry, in fairness, and that was happening, we were getting options and more opportunities to transition from one department to the next and really learn across those functions. So it was a different time, but it absolutely has been essential for me, especially if I think about the entrepreneurial aspects of what I've done and where I was PR, I was customer service, I was operations, I was doing a lot of these functions that you don't get a chance to do when you're, kind of going a very traditional route throughout your career. I didn't take that traditional route, but I don't know that I was smart enough necessarily at the time to actually think through, oh, this is the path I have to go. I kind of like zigged and zagged as I needed to based on the phase of my life. But I did, I kind of look at myself the way that I look at business, which is, where do I want it to go? And then I want to work backwards from that. That's kind of what I did. I said, this is what I want to be. Now I'm going to work backwards from that.
Super smart. I love it. Okay. So so that's kind of where you got to and where you're going now and what you're doing. So what inspired you to grow in your retail leadership role specifically? Like you said, I wanted to be a CEO. Why? Why did you want to be a CEO? What inspired you to do that?
Well, I think I just always had leadership goals, and it was a leader, whether it was in, being a head of a certain club or the head of my sorority or the head cheerleader, or whatever it was in my life that I was doing, I always wanted to be like the leader of the group or one of the leaders. Okay. So it's always just there within me. And, it was something that I aspired to do and to be. So, you learn from different people, and you learn the good, you learn the bad, and you try to define, and you also learn as you're growing and as you're doing, and some things work and other things don't work. And it's different in every situation, because every company is going to be different, because you have people, and at the end of the day, you're leading people, and people are all, their own perspective is their own reality. So, and ours is too, right? So you have to kind of manage things differently based on different generations, different times and phases of a company. Going in to turn around a company is never an easy job to have as well. 90% of the time you have to start with cutbacks, and you have to make some choices, and it's never easy. And turning around things, as we know in this industry, also takes time and patience, and it takes a lot of people being on the same page and support. And so leadership, I don't think there's one common theme of saying like, this is how you're a great leader. I think it does vary based on a phase of a company and their growth, and the type of company and the type of individuals within those companies, what has been established as that. Or if you're establishing it yourself, then you can set the parameters and say, this is the type of culture I want to create. This is the type of group and leaders beneath me that I want to have, or people, and how I want to kind of build everyone up from there. So you have a lot more flexibility, obviously, if you're doing it on your own. But if you're coming into a company, then you kind of have to and navigate that a little bit differently.
It's such a great perspective, right? Because leadership is like, different companies, different stages need so many different things. I've experienced that in my retail career, where I was in a startup, or I was in a huge organization, managing small teams, managing 5,000 people, and people always want this magic answer, like, what is, good leadership? But you've got to be agile and flexible, and look at your environment and adjust and read people, and kind of really figure out what's needed, right? To be able to be the great leader at that time, in that moment. And I just feel like I was in companies at the right time in history, with amazing experiences that happened that got me where I was as well. And I was driven to always learn. So I think that is a key point that you keep talking about, like always wanting to learn, always wanting to grow. So in your time as a CEO, because I love asking these questions, because people want to ask CEOs these questions, and they're like, how do I ask them? So what did you learn throughout your time as a CEO? Like, if you could say, huge lesson learned that you could share with our audience that they would, gain from.
Well, I think in everything, as you're kind of growing and moving up throughout your career, you need to elevate yourself and take yourself out of some of the minutia and some of the day-to-day tactical type of work that you may really enjoy doing. But then you have to get to a level, especially as a CEO, where you're not doing the day-to-day, right? You're doing a different type of day-to-day, which is the vision, the strategy, and creating an organization that's going to be able to execute on that. But oftentimes we come up and we are doing things, and so you always think, oh, I can do that and I can get that done, and you kind of get it, and you're involved maybe too much. So part of the thing is to be able to really look and create an empowerment amongst your leaders. And again, I'm not perfect, and nobody is, and we learn as we continue to go along. But I think there's an empowering aspect of being a CEO, number one, that you need to make sure that you trust and rely on your team, so that they are the support system that you need, and that the company needs and the business needs in order to grow. And that's a really, obviously having a supportive group of individuals that trust one another, it's not easy, right? Yeah. It's a really hard, complicated dynamic, and you have to make sure that that's also something else that you navigate. But I would say, one is to elevate yourself, to really think about the vision and the strategy and where you're headed and where you're taking the company, and making sure that you have the right individuals within an organization that are going to help you get there. Because every company is different at every stage. You just mentioned it before. If you're, $0 to $20 million, $25 million, whatever it is, it still takes as much work to run a $5 million company as it does a $500 million company, but you just have a lot more resources. Yeah. But, it's just different types of people and different skills. So I think those are the things that I would say in terms of how you really just continue to elevate yourself and think a little differently.
Yeah, 100%. What was a pivotal moment for you in your career?
Wow, I've had a lot. Pivotal moments. I think, what I try to do is I just try to learn and take from all of them. And, again, you're never that smart when you're in the moment, but it's only afterwards that you can see and understand, okay, I could have done better at that, or you know what, this was a good learning, or that went well, or this is the way we can do things differently. And the pivotal moments to me are always when I have those learnings, or when I feel like, okay, I got this team together. Okay, like this person I was able to help move forward in their career, or I was able to get them to understand, and like somehow that gelled, like those are the pivotal moments for me that I really look for and I look forward to, because it's such an amazing feeling when you're actually able to impact a group, impact a business, impact a feeling. So, pivotal moments to me are just, they happen all the time.
Yeah, I love that. And it's funny because whenever I talk to people outside of retail, they're like, oh yeah, you just sell things. And I'm like, no, it's so much more than that. If you actually talk to retail leaders, they'll say the one thing that they're passionate about in this industry is learning, growing, and developing other people and building teams. And I think that you do get that in other industries, obviously, but there's something about retail, because you're dealing with the customers and, and creating that magic in the stores, or with your product connection and all of that, that there is something to be said about like that team building and that gel of like when you just, you get that team working in the right direction, and you can get those results and inspire your customers. And I think that's really unique and kind of special to our industry. And it's kind of like this, to me, it's like our best kept secret. It's like, training and development and coaching. It's really a big part of this industry and what we do. And specifically it was for me in my career, just because I was in stores and I was always coaching teams in stores, so I can totally relate to that.
I also think it's different when you think about, you're not in finance, right? Where everybody comes from a certain type of learning and understanding and knowledge base, and you're focused on a specific market. You have in retail, you've got people that start when they're 14, 15 years old, and you've got people that have high school degrees, people have college degrees, people don't have none. I mean, you have everything. We're very inclusive and diverse group within our industry. So it's not like you can navigate just one way across the board. You have to really think about the various differences and the diverse group of individuals that exist within any organization, that you have, full operations. And certainly, if you have stores, that's one type of individual that's working in the stores, part-timers, et cetera. So yeah, I think we're very diverse that way as an industry.
Yeah.
Most people anyway, as an industry.
I know, 100%. So what do you know now that you wish you knew back then? Like, because looking back is always great, right? In hindsight, we can always like, oh man, I wish somebody told me that back then and I knew that. So what's that? Or is there something?
There's a lot of things. That's a really loaded question. I think one, there's things that they don't teach you in school that you have to learn. One is, how do you navigate through being an entrepreneur? How do you navigate through being in a corporate organization? A very large corporate organization, perhaps, if you're in one, how do you navigate through that? There's politics, there's the internal dynamics, there's your own growth and trajectory. And, some organizations are very structured and a little bit more rigid than others. So, I think that there's, wow, I mean, it's such a loaded question. What would I have known? I mean, there's, one thing would be, how do you navigate that? Like, how do you determine where you best fit? What your personality is, how much drive you have, how much change you like in your life or not. If you don't like change, and you want to be in the same place for 20 years, like that's amazing, because I never experienced that. But half the time I'm like, wow, I really wish I would have experienced it. So, I mean, you just kind of have to figure that out. That would be one. The other thing I would think that I do share with people as well is that, you have phases of life, and you go through different phases in your life. You might get married, you might have kids, you might become divorced. I'm telling my own story. You might have to figure out how to shift your career and shift your life to accommodate certain aspects of what you have to spend time on now.
Yeah.
And within that, there's one thing that I would say is that always stay connected. And staying connected, not only to individuals through networking and being there and being visible, but also staying connected with what's happening in the industry, because it's hard to get caught up if you're not involved, and it's hard to get caught up and jump back in again, as we all know, because things move at a very, very rapid pace, especially now with digital marketing, especially with technology. Everything's changing every day and has become faster. So I think those are things that I would say.
Yeah, and I coach leaders on that, like, it's because we work directly with like a lot of operations leaders, and I'm like, don't just, the days of you just being in your own brand and assuming the identity of the brand you're in and just knowing what that brand's telling you. There's so many avenues now, like LinkedIn has great news feeds, you can read up on what's going on in the industry. So like, put a little bit of time in your week to really go in and do that reading. And like you said, like get involved, know what's going on, know what technology is going on. Because if you're going to grow and become a decision maker, which, you know, hopefully people watching this will want to grow their career and make a bigger impact, you need to know what's going on. Because when you get into those roles and you have to make these decisions, it's kind of like, it's part of the job. Like, you have to know what's going on in the world around you. But I think a lot of times people just get into a brand and they just get sucked into that brand and just assume it, and like they just live in this box. What I've seen in the last year, though, is just these conversations of like breaking down those walls, and retail leaders coming together and just having these kind of conversations every week where we can actually, as an industry, want to make a difference and give back and kind of teach and learn from each other, you know?
Right. No, absolutely. And I think that there's the ability to do that now within this community. I think one, you know, social media certainly helps that. These type of platforms help that as well. But I think there's this genuine spirit now of wanting to collaborate and wanting to partner, and kind of washing away that whole rivalry of like, oh, competitor, I can't tell you anything. No, like, let's all help each other be successful in this industry.
Yeah, that's what I'm excited about. Would you say that's what you're excited about? We were talking about that a little bit earlier, but what are you excited about?
I'm excited about all the innovation that's happening right now. And I am excited about the fact that, you know, you can learn from anyone. I mean, I can learn from a 25-year-old, which I do, by the way. I think, you know, it doesn't matter. Like, we're learning from each other. And I think you can learn from peers. You can learn, and just being open to learning. To me, knowledge is confidence, and confidence gets you that voice at the table, the seat at the table, the decision-making power. So give yourself the option and give yourself the chance to really understand as much as you can and get the knowledge, gain it, use it, apply it, create your own set of confidence, and take control of your own trajectory. I mean, that's kind of what I'm excited about, that people are embracing now. And I feel more than ever, we're doing that not only for female empowerment, but just in general, being able to really, you know, help others and support others. It's a really big shift that I have felt in the last few years versus where, you know, just business had been before.
Yeah, absolutely. So how is Sandra Campos leadership evolved over time? Like, what would you say your leadership, you know, when I wrote the book, people were always asking me, you know, if you had to describe your leadership, how would you describe it? And we were talking about being a great leader at the beginning, but we've all evolved over time. So how has your leadership evolved?
Well, I also would challenge, what is a great leader? Because I think that's going to be different to different people as well. So, you know, there's obviously great leaders when you have great business results.
Yeah.
You're going to automatically be a great leader at that point in time. But there's also great leadership when you have people who you've helped grow within their careers, and all of a sudden they've taken over leadership roles as well. And, you know, my evolution, I think it's also who you learned from and how you learned. And when I came into the industry, it was a very different time. It was very, like, I won't go into all those details, but it was a very, very different time. A lot of things that just wouldn't be tolerated today were absolutely par for the course, and day-to-day things that were happening.
Right.
So I wouldn't say I had like the best initial leadership training. So then you find people then later who can actually, you can say, okay, you know what, I like that about them, or I would like to do it. And at the end of the day, again, it's also just depending on time frame. My evolution, though, I would say definitely also was impacted by being a mother. So when I have 3 kids, and I think motherhood has absolutely shifted and transitioned me, as well as just like time and age and your own level of experience. Because when you do have a lot more experience, you just naturally have more, I think anyway, you naturally have a little bit more confidence because you've been doing it for a long time. And so therefore your leadership style isn't like, you know, having to dominate every conversation, or having to, like, you know, make sure that everybody knows you're at the top. It's not about that. It becomes much more collaborative then, and you're not as concerned. So it's different. And I think those evolve also within different companies and what the expectations and challenges are within the companies as well.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I think the more that I grew into a senior role, the less I talked, the more I listened. And I realized I was there to do that and just bring on amazing talent and support people. But if I look back to the beginning, I remember getting some feedback when I was a district manager, like, oh, that wasn't great feedback. You know, my peers thought I was really competitive. And And then all of a sudden I was going to get promoted and lead them, and they didn't want me to. And I was like, it was some real learning moments. But yeah, like you say, it's always learning and growing, and specifically what's needed at the time in the market as well. I mean, what was happening back then is completely different to what this generation needs from us as leaders as well, right?
Right. It's also, I mean, the stress of a company, the time frame, in the company, and how quickly you have to make things happen or whatever. I mean, it impacts everyone within an organization for sure. And I'm still learning, by the way, and I'm still growing, and I hope to continue to learn and grow. And whether it's the dynamic of the individuals that I lead or the organization, it's just, and you made a really great point of listening and being a better listener, and actually having to learn how to be a listener.
Yeah.
Really a craft. So, the fact that you should think, oh, well, yeah, automatically, of course I listen, but there's real listening. And that takes a little bit as well to really acknowledge some of your own flaws and try to make sure that you're growing in the areas where they would be better helpful and more helpful for the individuals that work with you.
Yeah, listening's a hard skill. We think we're all good at it, but if you're listening to somebody speaking and you're thinking about what you want to say next, I would say, yeah, you're not really listening. You're really thinking about what you want to say. I teach leaders that all the time, and it's a hard practice for people to actually do that. And I actually ask people to go through 24 hours without using I, me, my, or mine in their language, and they have a hard time. I actually did that with a leader about 10 years ago. She said it took her 3 days to write an email. She couldn't do it. And she was like, it was so hard trying to put herself in that perspective of like, not about her, but about her team. So that's a good little exercise that I do with people. But yeah, it's So, you're doing some great stuff now. Like, what are you up to now?
So now, as the CEO of Project Barrett, which is a retail and supply chain solutions company, it's a SaaS-based technology company.
Yeah.
It is coming in. And again, there's the pivot that I had and that I created in this was, maybe I thought about it and maybe I didn't think about every part of it. But at the end of the day, it really was about taking all that I've learned from a retail operator perspective and bring it into technology, because the technology is not just about coding and, the technology is coming in and developing something that we can all use and enhance our lives, but it's about truly understanding what the problems are that we have to solve. So taking and bringing the operator's perspective rather into, how do we look and build this company? How do we make sure that we go to market? What are the strategies? What's the branding? What's the purpose that we have? Like, how do we make sure that we're solving those problems and we're creating solutions that actually matter, that are going to get used, going to make a difference, et cetera. And that part's really exciting because I am also learning more about supply chain, which I had never done. And, you're president or CEO of business, you're running these things, and yes, it falls under you, but that was kind of like the last area that I hadn't truly been like in the thick of it.
Okay.
And so now I'm in the thick of it, and it's actually great. So it's learning a lot and understanding, what the dynamics are now and in the future, in the next 10 years, of all the supply chain and distributed logistics that are going to change how we think about businesses and the operations behind it. And obviously, as we all see the constant evolution and innovation on the front end of e-commerce, and there's a lot of tools, a lot of SaaS companies, new ones every day. And there haven't been the same level of the amount of innovation on the back end. So that's actually happening now. So what I'm doing now is like, my learning and my research is constantly like, okay, who's coming up and how are they getting it, and all this capital that's around it and surrounding it to go to market, to be able to really identify like, how do we fit in and where do we go? And I have that, like, here's where I want to be. So now let's work backwards. How are we going to take it?
That's so exciting though, because you're right. The back end has not got where the front end has. And that's like a huge challenge for the actual industry right now. Massive.
It is. And retail in general, regardless of the category, it has to change just based on the tremendous growth that we've all experienced in e-commerce and what we're seeing, consumer behavior patterns changing, and the use of mobile, and obviously, everything digital going forward.
What about Fashion Launchpad? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So Fashion Launchpad is something that is launching this summer, and we will start out with a small cohort, and then we'll launch again going into fall. Fashion Launchpad was actually an idea that I had during the pandemic, and it came because I had to cancel an internship program, and I wanted to still be able to teach these interns about the industry and give them some knowledge about each of the disciplines and the functions and the core roles and responsibilities. So in that, it evolved because I posted something on LinkedIn and I got 2,400 people between comments and emails that I got. And it
I
ranged
love
from
it.
CEOs and founders to people saying, how do I take the classes? And I realized that there was a real need for our industry. It is something that because you're doing it yourself, but we have a very big, broad base of retailers and retail professionals or people who are interested in getting into the industry.
Yeah.
And you don't learn everything in school, and you don't learn everything every day, by the way, because things are evolving so quickly that you have to keep learning as you're going. And unless there's learning and development focus from your company or from yourself, if you're going back to school, that might be one thing. But I think that we are in a stage now in life and in our own culture that everything has to be digital. It has to be micro learning, because you want like nuggets of information that you can take and actually have actionable takeaways that will help your day job. So Fashion Launchpad's a digital continuing education platform. It's online, it's mobile first, it's micro courses taught by industry leaders such as yourself. I hope you'll be doing one.
Yeah, I'd love to.
And it goes across every single function. The one thing that I have always told everyone is that I think people underestimate what we do in this industry. It is
100%.
a very complex and complicated industry, and so much is involved. I mean, just because robotics are happening, guess what? Robotics also impacts retail, right? Just because last mile delivery, it impacts everything. So what we have now is we have this even more complex industry, because you've got new business models, you've got new challenges that you have to make. You've got DE&I, you've got everything from a human resources standpoint, along with the operations, along with digital marketing, along with e-commerce, along with the basic product development that's changing now too. So a lot of change requires you to constantly feel up to date with them. And certainly for me, I was never going back to school. And so I wasn't stop my career to then go back to school or take night courses because I had a family, or weekend courses that would take me away from them. So this offering is to be able to give people access on demand whenever they want it. And
I love it.
They can create playlists that will say, like, this is the course that I want to go on to. If I want to learn about retail operations, I'm going to go and look at all these different playlists that come from April, that come from Ron Thurston, that comes from, different people. And you can create your own playlist for it as well.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm just so excited about what's happening in this space right now. Like what you're doing with Fashion Launchpad, what we're doing with Retail You, what Ron's doing with his book, Retail Pride. There's just so many great retail influencers. Like we never had retail influence leaders before that are actually doing things and building things back to come back into our industry. So it's just, I'm so excited for that. And I'm wishing you the best of luck, because it's so necessary. We were talking a little bit earlier, people approach us at Retail You and like, can you expand your offering to merchandising and buying? And maybe we will one day, but our core focus is operations, because that's what we do really, really well. So I'm excited to see something like this coming into the market that can kind of fill that space and like give that micro learning. And like you said, upskilling is really important. I think the days of like sitting in a classroom and trying to retain it all and then go and do the job, that's not how retail is. Retail is like you're learning on the job. There used to be the saying, it's like you do the job and then you'll get the job. It's like that's kind of it in retail. You like craft your job and then you do it and then you get it because you're learning as you go. So I'm super excited.
I've never heard that. I like that. That's very true.
Yeah, that was back in the UK. I think somebody told me that a long time. They're like, if you want to get promoted, April, do the job and then you'll get the job. This is retail. And I was like, okay. So I was always like one step ahead the role that I was in, and that's how I always got recruited and got promoted. That was my mindset, so yeah.
I like that. It is true. So hopefully this will be something that will catch on and will really be helpful, because at the end of the day, it's about truly making a difference and helping everyone and having key takeaways and learnings from one that they'll be able to apply into their own career or their own day-to-day job.
So if you were going to give anybody, like advice of what do you think it's going to take to be a successful let's not say great, because we talked about great leader, but successful retail leader in business in the future, what would you say?
Being flexible, adaptable to change. There's a lot of change, and change will continue. And, change goes across all the different functions. So I think we as an industry haven't adapted to change as much as other industries have. And as we've seen, you've got D2C companies that came in, and these D2C brands, like all of a sudden everybody's like, whoa, business, stop. What happened to this, 25-year-old iconic brand? But D2C brands came in and did it differently. And most of those, or many of them, didn't even have real training and didn't come from our industry. So they disrupted it. And that change, we as an industry were not expecting. So that's why I say, change, flexibility, being able to have and create change management across your organization. I think that's going to be really critical.
Huge. Yeah. Gone are the days of not saying you can't have a strategic plan, but I remember the days of this is the 5-year plan, and everybody getting frustrated if they're not following this strategy. And now I'm when I'm working with directors, I'm don't get frustrated if things are going to change, because things are happening at light speed around us, and agile and flexibility is key, and not being frustrated with that, having a positive approach and a positive outlook to change and embracing it. I mean, after living in 3 countries, I tell you, change, just changing the way I communicate with people. I had to learn that, to be flexible. One word somewhere else meant something else to somebody else. So, it's super, super powerful. So I'm just so grateful. We're coming to our time. I'm so grateful, Sandra, to meet you and to have you on The Positive Effect and have you share your story today and your words of wisdom. I've got my piece of paper with notes. I've been writing little things down while you've been speaking, because I'm always learning from people that come on the show. So I can't thank you enough so much for taking the time out of your busy day. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for the positive energy, and thank you for bringing such joy to everything and everyone, and having these kind of podcasts, because again, I think just disseminating this information, getting new perspectives from people, it's beneficial. So thank you.
So if you are watching this, there's tons of comments, a ton of comments in the feed. You can go back and read them afterwards. I love doing that after the show, because it's just awesome to hear what everybody gets out of it. But if you see this in your feed, please share it with your retail network, share it with your retail community. These are conversations that are golden. You're going to learn so much from it. And so it's our job to be able to teach the new leaders coming up. And that's our aim at Retail U, is really to help that progression. And like Sandra said, upskilling people and relearning all the time. So share it with as many people as you can. And I just want to say thank you so much. And we'll be back next week. Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you, April.